A widowed black mom gives a cup of coffee to a lonely biker on a rainy morning. Just one small act of kindness. But by sunset, her quiet little cafe is surrounded by 800 roaring Hell's Angels, and the whole town is in shock. What starts as a simple gesture turns into a storm of fear, faith, and redemption. The townspeople whisper that she's lost her mind. The police show up at her door. And behind every motorcycle engine, there's a story of men searching for grace in a world that forgot them. She thought she was just helping a stranger. But that biker carries a secret that could change her life, and her entire town, forever. As hearts clash and faith is tested, one woman must decide, will she protect her family by turning them away, or stand up for the kindness that could save them all? Because when grace meets grit, the world will never be the same. Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The morning drizzle painted everything in shades of gray as Marcia Whitaker's key turned in the lock of Grace and Grit. The small cafe's windows were still dark, matching the pre-dawn sky, but inside lay all her hopes and memories. Her hands moved with practiced ease through the morning routine, flipping switches, checking thermostats, and starting the industrial coffee maker that had been here since James first opened the place. The coffee maker's familiar hum filled the quiet space, its warm aroma chasing away the dampness that had crept in overnight. Marcia paused, as she did every morning, in front of the framed photograph on the wall behind the counter. James smiled back at her in his dress blues, his Marine Corps pride evident in his straight posture and clear eyes. 3 years had passed since the drunk driver had taken him, but the ache felt fresh some mornings. "Mom?" Caleb's voice broke through her thoughts. Her 17-year-old son stood in the doorway, his shoulders already carrying too much responsibility for someone so young. "I've got the chairs." "Thank you, baby," she said softly, watching as he began lifting chairs off tables with careful movements. He'd grown so tall, looking more like his father every day. The thought brought both comfort and sadness. At a corner table, 9-year-old Naomi had already spread out her coloring books and crayons, her small face scrunched in concentration as she worked on what looked like another angel drawing. The girl had taken to drawing them after James passed, saying they helped watch over the cafe. Marcia moved behind the counter, checking their inventory. The numbers weren't good, hadn't been for months. But she couldn't let this place go. Grace and Grit wasn't just a cafe. It was James's dream made real. He'd wanted to create a haven for veterans and travelers, a place where a warm cup of coffee and a kind word could make the road feel less lonely. The morning regulars started trickling in around 6:30, mostly truckers and early shift workers who'd been coming so long they felt like family. Tom from the hardware store, Sarah who drove the school bus, old Mr. Peterson who'd fought in Vietnam. They filled the cafe with comfortable chatter and the clink of coffee cups. The bell above the door chimed around 10 o'clock, and the comfortable morning noise died so suddenly it was as if someone had hit a mute button. Marcia looked up to see a man standing in the doorway, rain dripping from his leather jacket. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with tattoos visible on his neck above his collar. His face was weathered, lined with years of hard living, and his eyes, a steely gray, seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing. The regulars' discomfort was palpable. Sarah pulled her purse closer. Mr. Peterson's hand tightened around his coffee cup. Even Caleb moved closer to Naomi's table, protective big brother instincts kicking in. The man took a seat at the counter, movements deliberate and controlled. His hands, Marcia noticed, had a slight tremor to them as he placed them flat on the counter's surface. Without hesitation, she grabbed a clean mug and filled it with fresh coffee. "On the house," she said warmly, placing it in front of him. You look like you could use something warm this morning." His eyes met hers, surprise flickering briefly across his face before it settled back into its stern lines. He gave a slight nod but said nothing, wrapping his hands around the mug as if seeking its warmth. Marcia went about her work, aware of the tension still thick in the air, but choosing to ignore it. She'd learned long ago from James that everyone had a story, and judgment helped no one. The man sipped his coffee slowly, staring into the dark liquid as if it held answers to questions she couldn't guess. When he finally stood to leave, his movement was stiff, like someone carrying an invisible weight. Marcia turned back to the counter after he'd gone and found a folded $100 bill tucked beneath the empty coffee mug. A note was scrawled on a napkin beside it. For kindness. Nobody's done that in years. She walked to the window, watching as he mounted his Harley. The motorcycle's engine rumbled to life, a deep sound that seemed to match its rider's demeanor. Through the rain-streaked glass, she watched him disappear down the wet road, becoming smaller until he was just a dark spot against the gray horizon. Something shifted inside her then, a feeling she couldn't quite name. It reminded her of what James used to say about small acts of kindness being like pebbles in a pond, creating ripples that reached further than you could see. Standing there, holding the $100 bill and that simple note, she felt those ripples starting, though she had no way of knowing where they might lead. Naomi's voice pulled her back to the present. "Mommy, look! I drew him with angel wings." Marcia turned to see her daughter holding up her latest drawing, a figure in black astride a motorcycle, but with magnificent wings spreading out behind him. The image brought an unexpected smile to her face, seeing how her daughter could find light even in what others saw as darkness. The cafe gradually returned to its normal rhythm, but Marcia kept thinking about those trembling hands and steel-gray eyes, about how a simple cup of coffee could mean so much more than just a drink. James would have understood. He'd always said Grace and Grit wasn't just about serving food. It was about serving hope. The lunch rush had barely begun when the whispers started. They rippled through Grace and Grit like a breeze through wheat, table to table, customer to customer. The morning's visitor had become the talk of the town. Mr. Peterson, who'd been coming to the cafe since James was alive, pushed his empty plate away and cleared his throat. His weathered face was creased with concern as he beckoned Marcia over. "Got a minute?" he asked, his voice low and serious. Marcia wiped her hands on her apron and slid into the seat across from him. "Of course, Mr. Peterson. What's on your mind?" He leaned forward, his coffee growing cold and forgotten. "Word's getting around about your visitor this morning." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Those people, they bring trouble, Marcia. Mark my words. One shows up, more follow, like wolves." Marcia's smile remained gentle but firm. "Kindness isn't trouble, Mr. Peterson. Never has been." "Your heart's too soft," he insisted, shaking his head. "James wouldn't want—" "James," Marcia interrupted softly, "taught me that everyone deserves respect until they prove otherwise. That man was just looking for a cup of coffee and a moment's peace, same as anyone else who walks through that door." Mr. Peterson's expression softened slightly at the mention of James, but worry still lined his face. "Just be careful. That's all I'm saying." The day continued, filled with the usual rhythm of plates and conversations, but Marcia could feel the undercurrent of concern in every glance thrown her way. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the windows, she and Caleb went through their closing routine. "Mom," Caleb said as he stacked chairs, his voice carrying that teenage mix of worry and attempted nonchalance. "Maybe Mr. Peterson has a point. That guy this morning, he looked dangerous." Marcia paused in her wiping down of tables, studying her son's face. He looked so much like James sometimes it made her heart ache. "Come here," she said, patting the booth beside her. Caleb sat, his lanky frame folding into the seat. The setting sun painted his face in amber tones, making him look older than his 17 years. "You know what I saw this morning?" Marcia asked. "I saw someone's hands shaking when they reached for their coffee. I saw someone who looked surprised, actually surprised, that someone would show him basic kindness." She took Caleb's hand, squeezing it gently. "Sometimes, baby, people just need to be seen. Really seen. Your daddy understood that better than anyone." The next morning dawned bright and sharp, the kind of cloudless day that made Oklahoma feel endless. Marcia arrived early, as always, losing herself in the comfort of morning preparations. She hummed while rolling out pie crust, the smell of baking apples and cinnamon filling the air. The first rumble was so distant she almost missed it. But then came another, and another, growing louder with each passing second. The thunder of engines filled the air like approaching storm clouds. Caleb rushed to the window. "Mom!" Marcia stepped out onto the wooden porch, and her breath caught in her throat. Motorcycles lined the road in both directions, their chrome and steel glinting in the morning sun. Riders in leather jackets sat astride their machines, silent and solemn, like some kind of modern-day knights. From among them, a familiar figure dismounted and walked forward, the man from yesterday. Up close, in the clear morning light, she could see the patches on his jacket more clearly. Hell's Angels. He moved with the same careful deliberation she'd noticed before, but now she could see something else in his bearing. Authority. "Ma'am," he said, his voice gravelly but respectful. "Name's Vince Radcliffe. Most folks call me Steele." He gestured to the gathering crowd of bikers. "You showed me more respect than this world ever has. My brothers wanted to return it." As if on cue, more motorcycles appeared on the horizon, their engines a rolling thunder that seemed to shake the very ground. They kept coming, wave after wave, until the morning sun struggled to find gaps between the bikes to reach the ground. Marcia stood on her porch, watching as the crowd grew. They came from every direction, these men and women in leather, their faces stern, but their eyes holding something she recognized, a hunger for belonging, for acceptance. By sunset, the count had reached nearly 800 riders. They stood like sentinels, a living wall of leather and chrome surrounding her cafe and home. Some of the locals had driven by throughout the day, their faces pressed against car windows, but none had stopped. The regular customers had stayed away, except for Sarah from the bus route, who'd smiled and said, "Well, business is business," before ordering her usual. The bikers themselves were unfailingly polite, coming in small groups to order coffee and food, leaving generous tips and keeping their voices low. They took turns, making sure the cafe was never overwhelmed, while others maintained their vigil outside. Vince stayed close to the porch, watching over everything with quiet authority. When Naomi brought out her crayons and started drawing portraits of the bikers, complete with angel wings, more than one tough-looking rider had to turn away to hide misty eyes. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, gleaming off the sea of motorcycles that stretched as far as the eye could see. Marcia stood in her doorway, watching this extraordinary scene unfold, thinking about James and his belief in the power of simple kindness. She couldn't help but wonder what he would make of all this, his little cafe surrounded by hundreds of Hell's Angels, all because she'd offered a cup of coffee and a moment of dignity to a stranger. The spectacle brought Highway 47 to a complete standstill. Cars lined up for miles, drivers craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the extraordinary sight. The rumble of 800 motorcycles had drawn attention like a magnet, pulling curious onlookers from every direction. Local news vans arrived first, their satellite dishes reaching towards the sky like metal sunflowers. Reporters clutched microphones, their hair perfectly styled despite the Oklahoma heat, jockeying for position near the cafe's entrance. Camera crews circled the perimeter, capturing footage of the leather-clad bikers who stood guard around Grace and Grit like a protective wall. "Mrs. Whitaker," a young reporter in a navy blazer called out, waving her microphone. "Can you tell us why the Hells Angels have surrounded your cafe?" Before Marcia could respond, two burly bikers stepped between her and the growing media crowd. "Ma'am doesn't need to answer any questions right now," one of them said firmly, his voice leaving no room for argument. From their porches across the street, neighbors gathered in clusters, whispering behind raised hands. Mrs. Thompson, who'd lived next door for 20 years, stood with her arms crossed, rocking slightly in her worn wicker chair. Mr. Rodriguez from the hardware store down the road had closed early to come watch, his usual friendly smile replaced by a worried frown. The bikers, seemingly oblivious to the attention, went about setting up camp with military precision. Tents sprouted like mushrooms in the field behind the cafe, their dark fabric a stark contrast against the golden grass. The air filled with the smell of grilling meat as portable stoves appeared, tended by tattooed men who handled their cooking duties with surprising care. Others brought out rags and polish, working on their bikes with methodical attention. The chrome began to shine even brighter under their ministrations, each motorcycle receiving the kind of attention usually reserved for precious artifacts. Vince found Marcia standing in her doorway, watching it all with wide eyes. His weathered face softened as he noticed her expression. "Don't worry about any of this," he said, gesturing to the controlled chaos around them. "We're not here to cause trouble. We're here because you reminded us we're still human." Marcia turned to look at him. Really look at him. In the afternoon light, she could see the deep lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders carried an invisible weight. "I just gave you coffee," she said softly. He shook his head. "No, ma'am. You gave me dignity. That's worth more than gold to men like us." As evening settled in, the reporters finally packed up their gear and drove away. The neighbors retreated inside their homes, though curtains twitched occasionally as they continued to watch. The bikers maintained their vigil, but the atmosphere had shifted to something more relaxed, more peaceful. Marcia made a fresh pot of coffee, the familiar routine helping to steady her nerves. She found Vince sitting alone on the cafe's porch, his large frame somehow making the wooden chair look small. She poured 2 cups and joined him, the string lights she'd hung last Christmas casting a soft glow over everything. "I did 8 years in Lexington," Vince said suddenly, his fingers wrapped around the warm mug. "Got out in 98, lost my wife, my kids, everything. My temper did that. Couldn't control it back then." He took a sip of coffee, his hands steady now, unlike yesterday. "Never knew my own daddy? Mama worked 3 jobs, barely saw her. Streets raised me mostly." Marcia listened, letting the silence stretch comfortably between his words. The distant sound of motorcycles idling created a gentle backdrop, like waves on a distant shore. "When you served me yesterday," he continued, "you looked me in the eye. Didn't flinch, didn't judge, just saw me. Made me think about all the times I didn't give people that same chance." She nodded, understanding flooding her heart. "James, my husband, he always said everyone deserves a moment of grace." Her voice caught slightly on his name. "He believed in second chances, third chances too if needed." "The Marine," Vince said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Yes." Marcia wrapped her hands tighter around her cup. 3 years ago. Drunk driver. Some days it feels like yesterday, others like a lifetime ago." She paused, gathering her thoughts. This cafe was his dream. Said he wanted to create a place where everyone could feel at home, even if just for a cup of coffee. The string lights swayed gently in the evening breeze, creating dancing shadows on the porch. From the campsite, someone had started playing a guitar, the melody drifting softly through the air. "Grief's a funny thing," Vince said, his voice rougher than before. "Follows you around like a shadow, sometimes so quiet you forget it's there, then bam, hits you right in the chest when you least expect it." Marcia felt tears prick at her corners of her eyes. "That's exactly it. Some mornings I wake up and reach for him before I remember. Other days I can almost hear him laughing in the kitchen." They sat together in companionable silence, sipping their coffee as the stars began to appear overhead. The rumble of engines had settled into a gentle hum, like a lullaby sung in chrome and steel. Around them, the bikers moved quietly, respecting the peaceful moment between two souls who understood loss all too well. The night air grew cooler, but neither moved to go inside. There was something healing in this shared quiet. This unexpected connection forged between a widow and an outlaw, both searching for redemption in their own ways. Dawn painted the Oklahoma sky in soft pinks and golds as Marcia started her morning routine at Grace and Grit. The familiar scent of fresh coffee and baking biscuits filled the air, but today felt different. Through the front windows, she could see the sea of motorcycles still parked outside, their chrome surfaces catching the early morning light. The sharp wail of a police siren cut through the peaceful morning. Marcia's heart skipped a beat as she watched a black and white cruiser pull up slowly, parking right in front of the cafe's entrance. Officer Dale Wilson stepped out, adjusting his belt with practiced authority. Before he could reach the door, a familiar figure in a pressed black suit walked up, Pastor Tom Hensley from First Baptist. The sight of him made Marcia's stomach tighten. She'd missed Sunday service yesterday, for the first time in 3 years. The bell above the door chimed as they entered. Pastor Tom's usual warm smile was replaced with a worried frown. "Marcia," he said, his voice carrying that special tone reserved for wayward sheep. "We need to talk." Marcia straightened her apron, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Would you like some coffee, Pastor? Officer Wilson?" The police officer shook his head, but Pastor Tom settled onto a stool at the counter. "Marcia, the town council held an emergency meeting last night. People are concerned." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Having the Hells Angels here, well, it sends the wrong message." Outside, several bikers were picking up litter along the roadside, collecting it in large black garbage bags. Others had set up ladders and were carefully repainting her faded cafe sign, their movements precise and respectful. "What message is that, exactly?" Marcia asked quietly, pouring coffee into a mug for the pastor, despite his lack of response. Officer Wilson cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we've received numerous complaints about harboring known criminals. The council's worried about public safety." A deep voice rumbled from the doorway. "Only danger here is jumping to conclusions without facts." Vince stood there, his massive frame filling the entrance. Despite his intimidating presence, his eyes were tired, and Marcia noticed a slight tremor in his right hand that he tried to hide. Pastor Tom shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Radcliffe, this isn't about individuals. It's about protecting our community's values." "Values?" Marcia set down the coffee pot with more force than necessary. "Pastor, you preached just last month about Jesus sitting with tax collectors and sinners, about how faith without works is dead. These men haven't caused any trouble. They're helping fix my broken fence, cleaning up trash, repainting my sign, things our community never offered to do." A tense silence filled the cafe. Outside, the sounds of work continued as the bikers went about their tasks, seemingly oblivious to the drama unfolding inside. Vince moved to the counter, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "Pastor, officer," he nodded to each man. "I understand your concerns, but maybe take a moment to see what's really happening here." He coughed, a rough, rattling sound that made Marcia wince. "Sometimes Grace comes wearing leather instead of a suit." Pastor Tom's face softened slightly. "Marcia, I know your heart is in the right place, but the church board is upset. They're talking about asking you to step down from the children's ministry." The words hit her like a physical blow. She'd led Sunday school for 5 years, ever since James died. Those children were her anchor during the darkest days of her grief. "I need some air," Vince said suddenly, heading for the door. Marcia followed him out onto the porch, leaving the pastor and officer inside. "You okay?" she asked softly, watching him lean against the railing. He shook his head, pulling out an inhaler. "Stage 4 lung cancer," he said after taking a puff. "Doctors gave me 6 months, maybe less. Found out right before I stopped here that first day." He turned to face her, his weathered face serious. "I've done a lot of wrong in my life, Marcia. Thought I'd die with all that weight still on my shoulders. But something about your kindness." He trailed off, looking out at his brothers working. "Made me want to spend whatever time I've got left making peace instead of war." Tears pricked at Marcia's eyes. She reached out and squeezed his arm, feeling the leather beneath her fingers. The day wore on, tension thick in the air. Marcia served customers while trying to ignore the whispers, the sideways glances. The bikers continued their work, transforming her property with quiet efficiency. By afternoon, the fence was fixed, the sign gleamed with fresh paint, and even the potholed parking lot had been patched. As the sun began to set, Marcia retreated to her small office in the back of the cafe. She closed her eyes, hands clasped in prayer. "Lord," she whispered, "I don't understand. These men need your love as much as anyone, but I'm scared. Help me know what's right." The sound of the mail slot clicking interrupted her prayer. An official envelope from City Hall slid across the floor, landing face up on the worn carpet. With trembling fingers, she opened it. The letter was cold and formal, filled with legal terms and thinly veiled threats. But the message was clear. Unless the motorcycle congregation left town immediately, her business license would be revoked. They cited public safety concerns, zoning violations, and health code regulations. Marcia sat at her desk, the letter crumpled in her hands, torn between fear and determination. Outside, she could hear the low rumble of motorcycles and the occasional laugh from the men who had become her unexpected defenders. Through her window, she watched Vince talking with a young biker, his hand resting paternally on the boy's shoulder. The letter represented everything she could lose: her livelihood, her standing in the church, her place in the community. But as she watched these rough men treating her property and her dignity with such care, she remembered James's words. Sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone. She wasn't alone, though. She had an army of angels, even if they wore leather instead of wings. The morning sun painted Grace and Grit's windows with golden light as Marcia stood in her kitchen, hands wrapped around a steaming coffee mug. Her mind wandered to the crumpled letter from City Hall sitting on her desk. The threat felt heavy, but something even heavier stirred in her heart: determination. When Vince came in for his morning coffee, she noticed how the sunlight caught the silver in his hair, making him look almost ethereal. His cough seemed worse today, and she couldn't help but think about the limited time he had left. "Vince," she said softly, setting down her mug. "I need you to know something." She straightened her apron, drawing strength from the familiar gesture. I won't ask you all to leave. If your brothers see you as family, then I will too." His weathered face softened, eyes glistening. "Marcia, you don't have to risk everything for us." "Maybe not," she smiled, "but I want to. Actually, I have an idea." She explained her plan for a community breakfast, something to bridge the gap between the town and the bikers. "We'll call it Peace and Pancakes." Vince's face broke into a rare, full smile. "My brothers make a mean flapjack, and we've been talking. We want to do something for the community." Word spread quickly through town about the breakfast. Marcia and her children spent the evening making signs while the bikers strung up extra lights and set up long tables in the parking lot. Caleb, usually so quiet since his father's death, helped the bikers arrange chairs, laughing at their jokes. Naomi decorated paper placemats with crayon drawings of motorcycles topped with angel wings. The next morning dawned clear and cool. The smell of pancakes and coffee drifted across the lot as Marcia watched the first townspeople arrive. They came hesitantly at first, a few veterans who regularly visited the cafe, some curious teenagers, families from the outskirts of town. The bikers, dressed in their cleanest leather, served plates heaped with golden pancakes and crispy bacon. Mrs. Henderson, who had initially been one of the most vocal critics, sat wide-eyed as a tattooed woman named Rose taught her granddaughter how to braid leather strips into a bracelet. Mr. Peterson, who had warned Marcia about those people, found himself deep in conversation with 3 bikers about their shared experiences in Vietnam. Midway through the breakfast, Vince clinked his coffee cup with a spoon, drawing everyone's attention. He stood tall despite his illness, his voice carrying across the crowd. "Folks, we want to thank you for giving us a chance today," he began. "Most places see us coming and lock their doors. But Marcia?" He gestured toward her, and she felt warmth flood her cheeks. She opened hers wider. That's the kind of grace that changes lives. He motioned to one of his brothers, who brought forward a large envelope. "We've taken up a collection, $3,000 for the local veterans shelter." He handed the envelope to the shelter's director, who sat stunned in his wheelchair. "It's not much, but it's a start." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then growing stronger. Vince raised his hand for silence again. "There's more. We're organizing something called the Grace Ride." His eyes met Marcia's. "In honor of James Whitaker, who dreamed of making this place a sanctuary for soldiers and wanderers alike. Once a month we'll ride to support various veterans' causes. First ride starts right here at Grace and Grit." Marcia pressed her hand to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. She felt Caleb's arm slip around her waist, holding her steady. As the day mellowed into evening, something magical happened. The tension that had gripped the town began to dissolve like morning mist. Children darted between the bikes, getting gentle lessons from their owners about motorcycle safety. Church ladies shared recipe secrets with tattooed men who turned out to be passionate bakers. When the sun set, the string lights twinkled to life, creating a warm glow over the gathering. Someone pulled out a guitar, and soon the air filled with the sounds of classic rock songs. Marcia watched in amazement as her children, who had carried such heavy sadness since James's death, came alive. Caleb joined a group of bikers who were teaching line dancing, his awkward teenage movements gradually becoming more confident. Naomi sat perched on a biker's shoulders, her small hands conducting the impromptu choir of rough voices singing Sweet Home Alabama. Marcia found herself swaying to the music, remembering how James used to spin her around their kitchen. A laugh bubbled up from deep inside her, the first real laugh she'd had in years. It felt like breaking through ice into warm water. "You okay?" Vince appeared beside her, offering her a cup of coffee. "More than okay," she smiled, accepting the cup. "I feel like Hope came home." They stood together, watching the unlikely family before them. Leather-clad bikers teaching the pastor's wife to twist, children playing tag between motorcycles, veterans sharing stories with young riders. The music and laughter floated up into the Oklahoma night sky, a testament to the power of second chances and open hearts. The string lights cast soft shadows across faces that no longer looked at each other with suspicion, but with growing understanding. Under the vast prairie sky, Grace and Grit had become more than just a cafe. It had become a sanctuary of acceptance, just as James had dreamed. Monday morning brought the sound of lawn mowers instead of motorcycles. Marcia stood at her cafe window, watching as 3 burly bikers carefully trimmed Mrs. Wilson's overgrown yard. The elderly widow stood on her porch, wringing her hands until one of them, a giant named Bear, gently showed her how well they were caring for her prized rose bushes. Across town, similar scenes unfolded. The Brotherhood, as they called themselves, had split into teams. Some fixed loose shingles on Vietnam veteran Jack Thompson's roof. Others repainted Marine widow Sarah Collins's peeling fence. Their leather vests glinted in the Oklahoma sun as they worked, their motorcycles parked neatly along curbs that had once been empty when they approached. "Would you look at that?" Caleb said, refilling coffee cups for the morning rush. The cafe was busier than ever. Curious visitors from neighboring towns dropping in to see the place where Grace had transformed a motorcycle club. Marcia watched as her son navigated the packed dining room with growing confidence. The past week had changed him too. The bikers had taken him under their wing, teaching him about engines and respect, filling some of the empty space James's death had left behind. By Wednesday, news vans lined the street. Reporters thrust microphones at Marcia, asking how she had tamed the notorious Hells Angels. She gently corrected them each time. "Nobody tamed anyone," she explained to a young journalist from Channel 5. "We just chose to see past labels and find the humanity in each other." The story spread like wildfire. The widow who tamed the Hells Angels blazed across headlines, despite Marcia's protests about the title. Letters and donations began arriving, first a trickle, then a flood. People shared their own stories of loss, redemption, and unexpected grace. Thursday afternoon, Vince found Marcia in the kitchen, elbow-deep in pie dough. He looked tired, but his eyes sparkled with excitement as he spread a set of papers across her flour-dusted counter. "Take a look at this," he said, pointing to a professionally designed logo. The words, "Grace and Grit Foundation," curved around an image of a motorcycle wheel merged with an angel's wing. "It's a non-profit partnership for veterans' families, especially the ones falling through the cracks." Marcia wiped her hands on her apron, studying the detailed proposals and mission statements. This is incredible, Vince. How did you put this together so quickly?" "Got some brothers who used to be lawyers before life went sideways. Turns out those skills don't disappear just because you put on leather." He smiled, then caught himself in a small cough. "The donations coming in? They'll seed the foundation, help with housing repairs, medical bills, grief counseling, all the things families need when their soldiers don't come home the same, or don't come home at all." Tears welled in Marcia's eyes as she traced the logo with her finger. James would have loved this. He always said that coming home was sometimes harder than being deployed. "The foundation needs a director," Vince said quietly. "Someone who understands both loss and hope. Someone who can bridge worlds like you do." Before Marcia could respond, Naomi burst into the kitchen. "Mama, the TV people want more pie." She paused, looking at their serious faces. "Are you crying again? Happy tears or sad tears?" Marcia laughed, scooping her daughter up. "Happy tears, baby, very happy tears." Later that evening, as the summer sun began to set, Marcia and Vince walked along the river that wound behind the cafe. The water reflected the golden light, making everything look soft and dreamlike. "You've given us purpose again," Vince said, his boots crunching on the gravel path. "These men and women, they've been running from their past for so long. Now they're building a future instead." He stopped suddenly, doubling over in a violent coughing fit. Marcia grabbed his arm as he swayed, helping him to a wooden bench overlooking the water. His face had gone gray, and his breathing was ragged. "It's spreading," he admitted once he could speak again. "Doctors gave me 6 months. That was 4 months ago." He pulled out a handkerchief, and Marcia pretended not to see the spots of blood he quickly folded away. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked softly, her heart aching for this man who had brought so much change to her life. "Didn't want pity," he said, "and there was work to do. Still is." He looked out over the river, his profile sharp against the setting sun. "I've done a lot of wrong in my life, Marcia, left a lot of damage in my wake. But this foundation, it could be something good, something that outlives me." Marcia took his weathered hand in hers. "We'll finish it together," she promised. "Every detail, every plan. We'll make sure it's built to last." They sat there as the sun sank lower, watching dragonflies dance over the water. A warm breeze carried the distant sound of motorcycles and laughter from the cafe, where the Brotherhood was hosting another community dinner. The scene before them was peaceful, but Marcia could feel the urgency in Vince's grip, the weight of time slipping away. "I'll help you," she repeated firmly. "Whatever you need, however long it takes, we'll make this foundation your legacy." Vince nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright as they watched the river flow past, carrying tomorrow's promises in its current. The antiseptic smell of the hospital room made Marcia's nose wrinkle as she arranged fresh flowers beside Vince's bed. He'd been admitted 3 days ago after a particularly bad coughing spell, and the white walls seemed to drain what little color remained in his face. "The doctors say another round of treatment might help," she said, straightening the bright yellow daisies. "And the foundation. Paperwork is almost finished. We just need—" Her phone buzzed. Then again. And again. Frowning, she pulled it out to find dozens of notifications flooding her screen. Her heart dropped as she opened a viral video from the local gas station. Rico, one of the younger bikers, was surrounded by 3 local men. "Go back where you came from!" one shouted, shoving him. "We don't want your kind here!" Rico's face twisted with rage. His fist flew, connecting with the man's jaw. Within seconds, the scene erupted into chaos. Punches, kicks, screaming. Blood splattered on concrete. "Oh no," Marcia whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "No, no, no." Vince struggled to sit up, his hospital gown crinkling. "What is it?" She showed him the video, watching his face darken. "Get me my phone," he ordered. "Now." Within minutes, Vince had both Rico and the Brotherhood's leadership on a conference call. His voice, though weakened by illness, carried the steel that had earned him his nickname. "This stops. Now," he commanded. "Rico, you're confined to quarters. The rest of you, damage control. We condemn this publicly, immediately. Clear?" But the damage was already spreading like poison through social media. Biker violence started trending. Local news vans appeared outside the cafe. Mayor Ellen Hardwick called a press conference on the courthouse steps. "In light of recent events," she announced, her pearl necklace gleaming in the camera lights, "we are suspending Grace and Grit's business license pending a full investigation into potential public safety violations." Marcia sat beside Vince's hospital bed, watching the mayor's speech on the small TV mounted to the wall. Her hands trembled in her lap. "Everything we built," she whispered. "All the good we've done." "This isn't over," Vince growled. already pulling out his IV. A nurse rushed in to stop him, but he waved her away. "Get my clothes." "Sir, you can't," the nurse protested. "Watch me." The night passed in tense silence. The Brotherhood posted guards around the cafe, but they couldn't stop what happened in the dark hours before dawn. The sound of shattering glass pierced the quiet neighborhood at 3 o'clock in the morning. By sunrise, Marcia stood amid the wreckage of her front windows, broken glass crunching under her feet. The morning light filtered through the jagged holes where her windows used to be, casting strange shadows on the floor. The cafe's interior was dusted with shards that sparkled like cruel diamonds. A brick lay among the debris, wrapped in a note. "Bikers and their lovers get out." Marcia's hands shook as she picked up a broken picture frame. It held a photo of James in his marine dress blues, smiling that bright smile she missed every day. The glass had spiderwebbed across his face. "Mama?" Naomi's small voice came from the doorway. "Why did they break our windows?" Before Marcia could answer, the rumble of motorcycles filled the air. Dozens of bikes rolled in, forming a circle around the cafe. The Brotherhood dismounted silently, taking up positions around the building. Some began boarding up windows, while others swept glass and set up a security perimeter. Rico pushed through the crowd, his face tight with shame. "Ms. Whitaker, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I let my temper—" "Stop." Marcia held up her hand, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Violence only brings more violence. We all have to be better than that." A commotion at the edge of the crowd drew their attention. Vince was there, pale and swaying but upright, still wearing his hospital bracelet. He leaned heavily on his bike, but his eyes burned with determination as he made his way to Marcia's side. "You should be in bed," she scolded softly. "Probably," he agreed, his breathing labored. "But this is more important." He turned to address the gathered bikers and the growing crowd of onlookers. "Listen up. We're not here for trouble. We're here for protection. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, this place and these people will be guarded. Anyone who wants to cause problems will answer to me personally." He broke into a coughing fit, and Marcia grabbed his arm to steady him. When he could speak again, his voice was quieter but no less intense. "They'll see who we really are," he told her softly, "even if it kills me." The morning sun climbed higher as the Brotherhood set up their guard rotation. Some brought camping chairs, others rolled in coolers of water and supplies. They moved with quiet efficiency, transforming the cafe's perimeter into a secure compound. Marcia watched it all through tears she refused to let fall. Her cafe might be damaged, her license suspended, but she wasn't alone. The very people the town feared most were the ones standing guard over her broken dreams, proving with actions what words had failed to convey. Rico approached again, head bowed. "Ms. Whitaker, I want to make this right. Just tell me how." She looked at the young man, seeing past the tattoos and scars to the hurt child still living in his eyes. "You can start," she said firmly, "by helping me sweep up this glass. Then we'll talk about real redemption." The morning wore on as the Brotherhood worked. They replaced broken windows with solid boards, painted with messages of peace and unity. They set up a donation station for the foundation. They brought coffee and pastries from other shops, making sure Marcia's regular customers could still get their morning fix, even if she couldn't serve them herself. Through it all, Vince refused to leave. He sat in a chair by the door, oxygen tank beside him, watching over everything with fierce pride. His breathing was labored, his color poor, but his presence gave strength to everyone around him. Marcia touched his shoulder gently. "You need rest." He covered her hand with his own rough one. "What I need is to be here. Sometimes standing your ground means actually standing your ground." Police cruisers rolled by, regularly, but the bikers remained calm and orderly. News vans lined the street, their cameras capturing the strange scene of leather-clad guardians protecting a small-town cafe. Social media buzzed with conflicting narratives, some calling for the bikers to be run out of town, others defending their right to be there. But through it all, the Brotherhood stood firm. They formed a living wall of protection around Marcia's dreams, their very presence a testament to the power of second chances and the strength of unexpected family. As evening approached, Marcia stood in her doorway, surveying the changed landscape of her life. The broken glass was gone, the windows boarded up, but the heart of Grace and Grit beat stronger than ever in the people who refused to let it die. 2 days passed like a slow heartbeat. The morning dawned clear and crisp as people began gathering outside Grace and Grit's boarded-up windows. Marcia stood on her porch, a well-worn Bible clutched to her chest, watching as the crowd grew larger. Church members who had shunned her days ago now stood shoulder to shoulder with leather-clad bikers, their faces softened by the glow of hundreds of candles. Pastor Tom approached first, his steps hesitant but determined. "Marcia," he said softly, "the congregation would like to join your prayer vigil, if you'll have us." She nodded, tears threatening to spill. "God's grace is for everyone." The crowd parted as Vince made his way forward, oxygen tank trailing behind him. His face was ashen, but his eyes still held that fierce light. He took his place beside Marcia, and the gathered people fell silent. With trembling hands, Marcia opened her Bible. Her voice, though quiet, carried across the hushed gathering. From Isaiah 42, verse 16, she read, "I will lead the blind by ways they have not known. Along unfamiliar paths I will guide them. I will turn the darkness into light before them and make the rough places smooth." The words seemed to hang in the air, touching something deep in every heart present. A veteran in his 70s stepped forward, medals glinting on his jacket. "I fought in Vietnam," he announced. "These bikers? They've done more good for veterans in the past week than most folks do in a lifetime. They deserve a chance." More voices joined in. Mrs. Henderson from the quilting circle spoke about how the bikers had fixed her fence and mowed her lawn. The high school principal described how they'd volunteered to mentor troubled teens. One by one, neighbors stepped forward with stories of kindness and service. Vince listened, leaning heavily against a post. His breathing was labored, but he managed a small smile. "Brothers," he called out, his voice weaker than before, "it's time for one last ride." The news spread like wildfire through the biker community. By noon, the rumble of engines filled the air as motorcycles poured into town from every direction. They came from Texas, California, New York, thousands of riders answering the call for peace. The Grace Ride was becoming something bigger than anyone had imagined. Marcia watched in awe as bike after bike rolled in. The Brotherhood had arranged everything meticulously: police escorts, designated routes, medical support. Each rider wore a black armband with "Grace and Grit" embroidered in gold. "This is your legacy," Marcia told Vince softly as they watched the preparations. "You've shown them what redemption looks like." He squeezed her hand, his grip weaker than before. "No, Marcia, you showed us first. 1 cup of coffee, remember? Sometimes that's all it takes to change a life." The ride began at sunset. Thousands of engines roared to life in perfect unison, the sound like rolling thunder across the plains. Vince insisted on leading, despite his condition. Marcia rode behind him on James's old Harley, which the Brotherhood had lovingly restored. They moved through town in a river of chrome and leather, but there was no menace in their presence. Children waved from sidewalks. Shopkeepers stood in doorways. Even the mayor watched from City Hall, his expression thoughtful. The procession ended back at Grace and Grit as darkness fell. Someone had strung up new lights, and hundreds of candles flickered in mason jars along the porch. The boarded windows, painted with messages of hope, glowed golden in the gathering night. Marcia stood at the center of it all, overwhelmed by the sight of so many people united in peace. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer of gratitude. Thank you, Lord, for showing us that love is stronger than fear. Thank you for second chances and unexpected families. Vince stood beside her, his hand warm in hers despite his growing weakness. The crowd fell silent, watching as this unlikely pair, the widow and the biker, embodied everything the movement had come to represent. Then it happened. Vince's hand went slack in hers. His knees buckled and he crumpled forward. Marcia barely had time to cry out before his brothers surged forward, catching him before he hit the ground. "Get him to the hospital," someone shouted. The Brotherhood moved with practiced precision, clearing a path as they carried their leader to a waiting van. Marcia watched them go, her heart in her throat, as the sound of sirens pierced the night. The crowd remained, holding their candles, joining hands in spontaneous prayer circles. The light from hundreds of flames pushed back the darkness, just as Marcia had read, a living testament to the power of grace over fear. The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital cast harsh shadows in the early morning hours. The waiting room, normally quiet and sterile, now overflowed with leather-clad figures. Their weathered faces told stories of hard miles and harder lives, but today they shared something else: worry and tears for their fallen leader. Marcia navigated through the crowd, nodding to familiar faces. Naomi's small hand was wrapped tightly in hers, while Caleb walked close behind. The Brotherhood parted respectfully, creating a path to Vince's room. Some reached out to touch Marcia's shoulder or ruffle Naomi's hair, gentle gestures from men society had labeled dangerous. "How's he doing?" Marcia asked Rico, who stood guard outside Vince's door. The young biker shook his head, his usual bravado replaced by raw emotion. "Doc says it won't be long now. The cancer's everywhere." His voice cracked. "But he's been asking for you, Mama Grace, all of you." That nickname, Mama Grace, had spread through the Brotherhood like wildfire. It started with Vince and now seemed to capture everything she represented to these men: acceptance, forgiveness, home. Inside the room, machines beeped steadily. Vince lay propped up against white pillows, his large frame somehow diminished. But his eyes, those steel-gray eyes that had once terrified her, lit up at the sight of them. "There's my family," he said softly, his voice raspy but warm. Naomi broke free from Marcia's grip and ran to the bedside. "I made you something, Uncle Vince." She pulled a folded paper from her pocket and carefully smoothed it out. The drawing showed a motorcycle with wings, surrounded by hearts and angels. Vince's weathered hands trembled as he took the artwork. "It's beautiful, little one. Just like your heart." He looked up at Marcia, his eyes glistening. "You gave me home, Mama Grace. All these years riding, and I never knew what I was looking for until I found your cafe." Marcia's throat tightened as she moved closer. Caleb, who had been hanging back, stepped forward too. The teenager's usual guardedness had softened, replaced by genuine concern for the man who had become a mentor. "The foundation," Vince continued, his breathing labored. "It's all set up. Papers signed yesterday. The Brotherhood knows what to do." He reached for Marcia's hand. "Promise me you'll keep it going. Promise me this wasn't all for nothing." Marcia leaned down and kissed his forehead, her tears falling onto his cheeks. "I promise, Vince, the Grace and Grit Foundation will be your legacy. We'll help so many families just like you wanted." He nodded, satisfied. "Caleb," he called, and the boy moved closer. You're the man of the house now, but that doesn't mean you have to carry it all alone. The Brotherhood, they're your family too. Let them help." Caleb's voice was thick with emotion. "Yes, sir. I will." They stayed for another hour, sharing quiet moments and memories. Naomi curled up in a chair, adding more angels to her drawing. Caleb told Vince about his plans for college, about maybe studying social work so he could help with the foundation. Marcia simply held Vince's hand, offering silent comfort as pain periodically crossed his face. When Vince's eyes began to drift closed, Marcia knew it was time to leave. She gathered her children, promising to return later. As they stepped out, she heard him whisper, "Thank you for seeing me, Mama Grace. Really seeing me." The hallway was still packed with bikers, their numbers seeming to have grown. News had spread fast through their network, and more arrived by the hour. Every waiting room chair held a leather-clad figure. They spilled into corridors and filled the cafeteria. But it was what Marcia found outside that took her breath away. Hundreds of bikers knelt in the parking lot, forming concentric circles. Their heads were bowed, and their voices rose in a low, powerful murmur of prayer. Some held rosaries, others clutched Bibles, and still others simply pressed their hands together in desperate supplication. These were men and women society had written off as lost causes. Yet here they were, humbling themselves before God, praying for their brother. The sight brought fresh tears to Marcia's eyes. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, a new sound filled the air. It started with one bike, then another, and another. Engines revving in a rolling tribute to their dying leader. The sound echoed off the hospital walls and carried across the city, a thunder of respect and love. Marcia stood with her arms around her children, watching the sky turn orange and purple. The air vibrated with the sound of hundreds of engines, a biker's version of a 21-gun salute. In that moment, she knew with certainty that Vince's time was drawing to a close. But she also knew that what he had started, what they had started together, would live on. The foundation would continue his work. The Brotherhood would honor his memory. And Grace and Grit would always be a place where outcasts could find family, just as Vince had. The engines roared louder as darkness crept in, and Marcia whispered a prayer of her own. Not for healing, it was too late for that, but for peace. For Vince to know, in his final hours, that he had succeeded in changing lives, that his redemption story would inspire others, that he would be remembered not for his mistakes, but for his transformation. The parking lot glowed with headlights now, each bike a beacon in the gathering dusk. The prayer circles continued, leather-clad figures holding hands and sharing hope. Rico appeared at Marcia's side, his eyes red but determined. "We'll keep watch through the night, Mama Grace," he said softly. "You should take the little ones home. We'll call if—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Marcia nodded, understanding. As she guided Naomi and Caleb toward their car, the sound of engines followed them, a constant reminder that they were not alone, that they would never be alone again. The call came at 3:15 in the morning. Marcia had been dozing in her armchair, still dressed, when her phone buzzed. Rico's voice was thick with grief. "He's gone, Mama Grace. Went peaceful, just slipped away with his brothers around him." Marcia pressed a hand to her mouth, tears falling silently. "Thank you, Rico. Thank you for letting me know." She sat in the darkness for a long while, remembering Vince's weathered face, his gentle way with Naomi, his determination to leave something good behind. Eventually, she climbed the stairs to wake her children. They needed to know. Caleb was already awake, sitting on his bed. "Mom?" One look at her face told him everything. He stood and wrapped his arms around her, letting her cry into his shoulder. They woke Naomi together, holding her close as she tried to understand why Mr. Steele had to go be with the angels. Dawn broke gray and hushed over Oklahoma. The morning felt different, heavier somehow. News vans began appearing on the street as word spread. Reporters stood in front of Grace and Grit, their voices somber. Vincent Steele Radcliffe, national leader of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, passed away peacefully last night. His remarkable transformation and partnership with local cafe owner Marcia Whitaker had captured hearts nationwide. Marcia moved through the morning in a daze. Her hands performed familiar tasks, measuring coffee, warming ovens, but the cafe felt hollow without the rumble of bikes outside. The morning regulars trickled in quietly, offering condolences with their orders. "Found this in the garage," Caleb said softly, carrying in a framed photograph. It showed Vince sitting on the cafe porch, laughing at something off camera, his usual stern expression replaced by genuine joy. Marcia touched the image gently. "Let's put it next to Daddy's," Naomi suggested, pointing to James's photograph on the wall. Together they hung Vince's picture beside James's. The two men seemed to look at each other across time and space, a Marine and an outlaw, both finding redemption in their own ways. Marcia stepped back, studying the images through tears. James in his dress blues, proud and principled. Vince in his leather cut, rough but reaching for grace. Different paths, same destination. "They would have liked each other," Caleb said quietly. "Dad would have seen past the patches and tattoos, just like you did, Mom." Around 10 o'clock, the first motorcycles appeared. They came in 2s and 3s at first, then in larger groups, until the road was filled with the low thunder of engines. The Brotherhood had returned to escort their leader home. Rico approached Marcia, holding something carefully folded. "He wanted you to have this," he said, presenting Vince's leather jacket. The patches were worn, the leather creased with years of use. "Said it belonged to the Keeper of Grace now." Marcia clutched the jacket to her chest, inhaling the familiar scent of leather and road dust. She thought about the man who'd worn it, how he'd walked into her cafe that rainy morning, hard and hollow, and walked out with a spark of hope that grew into a flame. The procession to the cemetery was unlike anything the town had ever seen. 800 motorcycles filled the streets, their riders solemn in formation. Police escorts cleared the way, showing respect rather than suspicion now. Marcia rode in the lead car with her children, holding Vince's jacket and watching the endless line of bikes in the rearview mirror. The engines created a continuous roll of thunder, like a funeral hymn played on chrome and steel. People lined the streets, many holding signs, "Rest in peace, Steele," and "Grace and Grit forever." Veterans stood at attention, saluting as the procession passed. At the graveside, chairs had been set up beneath a white canopy. The bikers formed a vast circle around the space, their bikes gleaming in the midday sun. Ministers from 3 different churches had come to officiate, a testament to how far things had changed. When it was time for the eulogy, Marcia walked to the podium. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was clear and strong. "Vince Radcliffe came to my cafe looking for coffee," she began. "He found something else instead, something we all spend our lives searching for. He found grace. Not the easy kind that comes with conditions, but the hard kind that requires us to change." She looked out at the sea of leather and chrome, at the tears on rough faces. "Vince taught me that grace is the only road that leads us home. It's the path through our darkness, our mistakes, our regrets. It's the highway that carries us from who we were to who we're meant to be." Her voice caught, but she continued. "He was more than a leader to his brothers. He was a beacon, showing us all that it's never too late to change course. The Grace and Grit Foundation will carry on his work, helping veterans and their families find their way home, too. Marcia touched the leather jacket draped over her arm. In his last days, Vince told me something I'll never forget. He said, "Grace isn't just about receiving mercy. It's about passing it on." That's his legacy. That's what we'll remember when we see his picture next to my James's at the cafe. Two men who understood that love is stronger than fear, that kindness never dies, and that grace can transform even the hardest heart. The bikers revved their engines in tribute as the service ended, the sound rolling across the cemetery like thunder. Marcia stood with her children, watching as Vince's brothers paid their final respects. One by one, they laid their cuts across his casket, a blanket of leather and memories. The sun broke through the clouds as the last prayers were said, casting long shadows across the grass. Marcia held Naomi close as she waved goodbye to Mr. Steele. Caleb stood tall beside them, his father's strength and Vince's determination visible in his stance. The thunder of engines filled the air once more as the brotherhood prepared to ride out. But this time, the sound carried hope instead of menace. It spoke of redemption instead of rebellion. It promised that grace, once found, never truly leaves us. The autumn breeze carried the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings as Grace and Grit reopened its doors 3 weeks after Vince's funeral. The cafe gleamed with a coat of warm cream paint, and hanging baskets overflowed with purple petunias, Vince's favorite color. Inside, Marcia arranged fresh-baked muffins while watching the transformed scene outside her window. Veterans in wheelchairs worked alongside leather-clad bikers, rebuilding the Johnson family's wheelchair ramp down the street. The Grace and Grit Foundation's first project was already changing lives, backed by more than $100,000 in nationwide donations. "Mom, the playground equipment just arrived," Caleb called out, his delivery van pulling up. He'd taken charge of coordinating foundation projects, showing leadership that made her heart swell with pride. On the cafe's east wall, Naomi stood on a ladder, carefully adding final touches to her mural. The angel she'd painted wore leather wings and rode a gleaming Harley, with golden letters spelling out "Kindness Never Dies" arching overhead. Pastor Tom's familiar figure appeared in the doorway early Sunday morning before service. His eyes were warm with unshed tears. "Marcia, would you pray with me?" he asked softly. "I've been thinking about what true faith looks like. Maybe sometimes it wears leather and rides a motorcycle." Marcia smiled through her tears, reaching for his weathered hands. Together they bowed their heads in the quiet morning light, while outside, the town that had once turned its back now worked as one family, united in purpose and grace. The Oklahoma sun painted the horizon in brilliant orange and gold as motorcycles appeared like a rolling thunder across the distant hills. It had been exactly 1 year since Vince's passing, and the second annual Grace Ride was about to begin. More than 1,000 bikes stretched as far as the eye could see, their chrome gleaming in the morning light. Marcia stood on the cafe's porch, wearing Vince's old leather jacket, its patches telling stories of miles traveled and brotherhood earned. The weight of it felt right on her shoulders, like a warm embrace from both the men she'd lost. She moved between tables with practiced grace, pouring steaming coffee for the first wave of riders who'd arrived early. At exactly noon, Marcia took the microphone, her voice steady and clear. "Today we ride in memory of 2 extraordinary men, James Whitaker and Vincent Steele Radcliffe. One dreamed of this place as a sanctuary for weary souls. The other showed us that redemption roars on 2 wheels." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. As evening approached, the riders lined up their bikes. The rumble of engines filled the air in perfect unison, 1,000 mechanical hearts beating as one. It sounded like a hymn, deep and powerful, echoing off the hills. Marcia sat in her favorite porch chair, Naomi curled contentedly in her lap. Caleb stood beside them, tall and proud in his foundation jacket. Together they watched the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in colors that matched the warmth in their hearts. "One cup of coffee?" Marcia whispered, a smile playing on her lips, and the world found its way home. The engines faded into the distance, their echo lingering like a prayer in the evening air. Above them, the cafe sign glowed softly in the gathering dusk. Grace and grit, where kindness lives. The letters cast a gentle light on the porch, a beacon of hope in the growing darkness. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.